And good evening. And once again, welcome to the Shadow Gallery. I am, as always, your host, James Donnelly. And tonight we're going to discuss something that's been distressing me for a while. And it's it seems to be getting not worse, but it just the same. Well, okay. We're going to talk about the state of the current DC animated universe. Okay, now this is something that I think for most comic fans, something very near and dear to their hearts. Because so many of us grew up on, lots of different kinds of cartoons. I grew up on, obviously, reruns of, the classics, Tom and Jerry, Looney Tunes, that kind of stuff. And then, the 80s came along and, suddenly we had, Saturday morning cartoons were still a big deal, and, you had, G.I. Joe and Transformers and, Robotech, um, it's all sorts of stuff. Um, and then you had this kind of very perfunctory version of the Justice League, which was the Super Friends, which in hindsight is one of those shows that's fun because it's nostalgic, but it's really kind of lame when you really think about it. Um, the only really cool thing that the Super Friends cartoon ever did was creating the Legion of Doom, which was, to be fair, pretty damn cool. Um, and that's something that I don't know if honestly was an extension of the comics or something that the cartoon actually brought into the comics realm. Um, and then and then after kind of years, kind of like the late '80s into the very early '90s, cartoons just sucked. After school programming became really dull. There's no good like action cartoon out there. You had Power Rangers and Ninja Turtles and all this stuff that was very very kid friendly. And then all of a sudden, 1992, the cartoon world exploded as far as getting a really awesome uh, superhero comic book cartoon back, and that was, of course, with the uh, the entrance of Batman the Animated Series, um, which easily goes down in history as one of the very best cartoons ever created. Um, at least in the superhero realm, in the superhero action realm, there's very few things that have topped Batman the Animated Series. And then you had Superman the Animated Series, which it wasn't as good, but it was still pretty decent. But Batman, because you had so many different characters, and they were kind of introducing a lot of storylines that were actually from the comic into the into the series itself. And then Mask of the Phantasm, which is one of those Batman movies that everybody forgets about when they talk about the theatrically released Batman films and being one of the very best. Um, and a film that doesn't really get talked about a lot because it's overshadowed because it was kind of not a lot of people saw it in the theaters. I didn't see it in the theaters, and I felt really bad about that. But certainly saw it on and own it on home video in pretty much every incarnation that it's had. And Sub Zero, and and then the offshoots of Batman with Batman Beyond. I mean, how awesome was that in the late '90s? Um, and then the early 2000s, we got Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, and that just blew the roof off the place. These two cartoons were amazing. Particularly this, once we got into the second season of Justice League and the first seasons of Justice League Unlimited, it was clear that they were not just trying to tell stories just for kids. And I mean, to be perfectly honest, it was clear from the beginning, but especially so once it got around to, Justice League Unlimited and, the ideas of like Task Force X, and, the whole kind of, the Justice Lords, which is from Justice League. But anyway, you get where I'm going with this, is that, I mean, it was an amazing time to be a cartoon fan while these shows were on. And then those shows ended, Justice League ended pretty abruptly, and very sadly. And, we also had, Marvel was putting out their stuff. They had the Iron Man cartoon, which was lame. The Spider-Man cartoon, which was, the X-Men cartoon, I was honestly never a fan of. But the one thing that they were good at was blending in the real, things like the Phoenix Saga, in their cartoons. I mean, of course, they couldn't be as graphic and as cool as they were in the comics, but at least they endeavored to bring those ideas into an animated world. So for that, I have to applaud them. But I always thought that the cartoon was kind of lame. So Marvel was, but DC was because they just kept putting out kind of great cartoon after great cartoon. And then recently, we've had in the last couple of years, the introduction of two excellent DC animated shows, Young Justice, which became Young Justice Invasion, and both of those shows were excellent, and they were totally fucking axed with like no warning. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, it's over. And also, Green Lantern, the animated series, which is very much kind of bringing back kind of the Batman animated series kind of vibe to it. It was, although it was all done with CG animation, as opposed to, basically kind of getting rid of the hand-drawn stuff, and moving into this new frontier of animation. And it was pretty, it was really exceptional. It was a great series. And again, that was, axed before its time, far before its time, really. In favor of the new Teen Titans Go cartoon and the Beware the Batman cartoon, which is sadly very, very dull. But also doing things like Batman the Brave and the Bold, which again I didn't really watch, but the episodes that I did see were actually really cool. And The Batman, which was kind of the beginning of Batman's career. So kind of some interesting new character designs and so on and so forth. But that didn't last very long either. But the one thing that did actually really impress me is I thought the Batman versus Dracula direct-to-video release was actually really cool. So, but over the course of several years now, DC has been putting out some really high-quality direct-to-video animated releases. Starting with Superman Doomsday, which of course is the retelling of the Superman, the Death of Superman arc. In films like Green Lantern First Flight, and you know, Batman Gotham Knight, which was an interesting failure, if anything. Um, but so I think I said Wonder Woman, which was terrific, and then it got it's like it kept getting better. It's like, okay, well, here, Crisis on Two Earths, uh, and then into stuff like Batman, Under the Red Hood, which to me is definitely one of the best releases they've had. Um, then there was, of course, before there were the Batman Superman films, like Batman Superman Apocalypse, which is cool, but Batman Superman, Superman Batman Public Enemies is awesome. um, and Batman Year One was an interesting adaptation, but it didn't really live up to its potential. And the Batman, The Dark Knight Returns videos were both terrific, and it's kind of the second one is really quite good. I don't know if I actually did. I think I did full length reviews of those. They were quite good. Justice League Doom, All Star Superman. These are all top notch productions. I mean, really, really good. Even though I didn't really care for the way that they kind of screwed around with the Tower of Babel storyline and Justice League Doom, it's still a really, really good. It's really good work. And All Star Superman, I loved. I know I did a review of that way back when that came out, because that came out, I think, literally the day that its director Dwayne McDuffie died, which was very sad, because he was such a big part of the DC animated universe. And then a lot of these films, they started coming with these little, if you got, I think, the DVD or the Blu-ray, they came with these, animated shorts, which featured, characters like Catwoman and the Spectre, which is honestly my favorite one. There's a really cool Jonah Hex one. There was, Superman's Shazam one, which are all collected in one title if you didn't get the Blu-rays. And the Blu-rays, they also come with like bonus episodes of, either Batman or Justice League or Superman or whatever, to kind of explain where some of these stories got their beginnings. Now, when I heard that Bruce Timm, who is, basically like, he's there, if there is a god to the DC animated universe, it's absolutely Bruce Timm. I mean, he's the guy that really brought, the DC animated universe to the forefront of what was going on as far as, comic book adaptations to animated films. Because, let's face it, I mean, Marvel was kind of trying to do its thing. It kept, kept kind of bringing Spider-Man cartoons out, and a lot of them were kind of lame. Ones that tied into the movie, ones that stood on their own. Now there's Ultimate Spider-Man, and kind of getting away from the kind of darker, deeper storytelling, not necessarily darker, but certainly deeper storytelling that was going on in DC, and even DC started to stray away from that, at least as far as their cartoons, their Saturday cartoons were concerned. And Bruce Timm leaving the DC animated universe, basically continued to work for Warner Brothers, but no longer acting as head, of the DC animated universe, I had a fear that it was going to kind of implode, for lack of a better term. And the sad thing about it is that it really kind of did. Now, I'm doing this tonight because last night I watched, I got through Netflix, Son of Batman, which of course is the adaptation of the beginning of Grant Morrison, the first arc that Grant Morrison brought to the Batman comic book that he worked on. I was really looking forward to it because that was actually the only arc of Morrison's that I really, really liked when he was doing Batman. Because it was kind of fun, it was kind of weird. It brought back, it brought back the this child that Batman and Talia had together. But if you've seen it, I'm not going to review it here. But if you've seen it, it is honestly, it literally takes, I think, the loosest possible definition of based on a story by, because there is maybe 10% of what's in this animated film is based on what Morrison actually wrote, and everything else is completely made up, brand new for this film. And so I kind of go back to, because what happened, Bruce Timm stepped down, and this man named James Tucker had taken over. And James Tucker has a lot of work under his belt. He was one of the series directors of Batman Beyond. He worked on a lot of different stuff at DC over the years. So, it's a guy who seems to have some good bona fides out there. But what's happened is that, and this is very clearly what I believe to be essentially a power trip by, for the most part, one man. Because there have been 4 releases since Bruce Timm stepped down, I think in 2012. Or maybe even 2013, I'm not quite sure. But the first film to be released was Superman Unbound. And Superman Unbound was based on the Superman Brainiac story arc written by Geoff Johns, who happens to be, he's the chief creative officer now at DC. So, prior to this, I don't recall any of Geoff Johns' specific storylines coming to the DC animated universe. But out of the 4 films that have been released so far, 3 of them are based on stuff that Geoff Johns himself wrote. So now Geoff Johns, I'm sure you've heard me talk about this, he's a very hit-and-miss guy. He's one of the biggest examples of hit and miss that I can possibly think of in the comic book realm. He either does... There isn't much in between with him. I think he does either absolute dog shit, or he does something really great. I really enjoyed, his, Green Lantern Rebirth. I enjoyed, actually, come to think of it, a good amount of his stuff pre the New 52. And, I loved, okay, let me put it this way. I really liked Blackest Night. I loved Brightest Day. I thought Brightest Day was awesome. And then once he and Jim Lee kind of came together and said, well, we got to start this New 52 thing because our sales are, kind of sucking. And we want to, kind of do a reboot of the universe, but still keep some comics the same while introducing these other new characters, but taking away, a lot of these other characters, a lot of fan favorite books, a lot of, fan favorite characters, Secret Six, Stephanie Brown, Cassandra Cain, you know, a lot of these were being kind of ripped away from us in favor of this new thing. So I've talked about that a lot in my past review sessions, so I don't want to get into that here. So, Superman Unbound, that was directed by James Tucker, and it was written by Bob Goodman, who also wrote the Dark Knight Returns films, and did a really excellent job of adapting those two books. So it was the film was okay. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I'd completely forgotten about it. I think one of the reasons for that is just it didn't leave a big impression on me. Excuse me. And the other part is that the other films that came after it, particularly the one that came directly after it, left such an acrid taste in my mouth that I just started to kind of freak out in a way, because I couldn't believe the direction that they were going in. Because, okay, so we went from one Geoff Johns story to another, which, in my opinion, honestly, is, besides the recent Avengers versus X-Men event back in 2011, I think it was 2011, you had another really awful event comic, which is people kind of give this as the example of this is what kind of brought about the reboot of the new of DC with the New 52 initiative, and that was Flashpoint. So DC Animated Universe put out Justice League: The Flashpoint Paradox, which is honestly a pretty faithful adaptation of the comic, and in fact, I think one of its main problems that it is so kind of slavishly devoted to the Flashpoint series and some of its spin-offs, like the Batman spin-off, the Superman spin-off, kind of all these different things. Now, if you've read Flashpoint, it's easily the ugliest comic that DC has done in recent history. There is so much death and so much horrible stuff that goes on in this that, the only reason that it exists is to show, okay, well, this is what could happen. You have all these, everything gets super fucking dark. And that, if I, and it's just, it's garbage. I mean, it's fucking garbage, because it's just death and killing and murder and blood and, horrific ways of killing people and torture and so on and so forth, just to justify the fact that things are better in the regular DC universe. And that's not good storytelling. And, this was, Flashpoint Paradox was directed by Jay Oliva, who, when I look at his credits, he actually jumped the fence. He was directing animated films over at Marvel. He did the Invincible Iron Man, which was bad. He did the Doctor Strange one, which I actually thought was pretty good. but then he came over and he did Green Lantern Emerald Knights, which is really good. He did the parts 1 and 2 of Batman: The Dark Knight Returns. He directed 10 episodes of Young Justice. So I mean, this is a guy who knew how to create good storytelling, drama, so on and so forth. Now, this is only part. So obviously, to me, the thing that happened over at DC and DC Animated was that Geoff Johns or just Geoff Johns went kind of power mad and said, you know what, we're going to crank these things out. Everything since Bruce Timm's departure has been so much lesser than what came before it. It's frightening. Like I said, Superman Unbound just didn't leave really much of an impression on me at all. But Flashpoint Paradox, the animation is terrible. The music is terrible. The voice acting is, despite the fact that there are some really good people involved, like Kevin McKidd and Michael B. Jordan and a number of other people, there are good people involved, but it's just terrible. Because it is, like I said, so slavishly devoted. And that was written by a guy named James Krieg, who worked on Green Lantern, the animated series, who worked on The Brave and the Bold, who's worked on Ben 10. So again, this is another guy who knows good storytelling. And so, I mean, but just, the huge drop-offs have been animation and storytelling, which, to have a branch of DC, to have a branch called the DC Animated Universe, to have very subpar kind of pseudo-anime style animation that looks like garbage. The voice actors clearly think that they're just kind of doing this thing where they're going in and sitting down in front of a booth and just slacking off. So this is the part that polarizes some people, is that people, and even myself included, I like when popular people come in and do voices. I like it when they try something a little bit different, something a little bit new. But ultimately, the best Batman that has ever existed has been Kevin Conroy, and we all know that. I mean, as much as I love Christian Bale, Kevin Conroy embodied everything about Bruce Wayne just using his voice. And that's a pretty remarkable thing. So, when you have all these, kind of guest star voiceover actors, they're actors. They're they're film and television actors, and they just happen to be doing what I honestly think is just kind of an easy gig. And kind of the sad thing about this is that Andrea Romano, who has been the voice director, the voice talent director over at DC Animated since I think pretty much it began, with Batman the Animated Series. She's been with them for a really long time. But I think they're going for some of these more kind of high-profile names, like, for instance, Superman. So instead of, having, people like George Newbern or Tim Daly or Kevin Conroy or Susan Eisenberg or Carl Lumbly, they're replacing a lot of these people with, for instance, Superman Unbound had Matt Bomer from White Collar as Superman, had Stana Katic, however pronounce her name, from Castle. Molly C. Quinn, also from Castle, as Supergirl. so they're not getting, voice actors to do this stuff anymore. They're getting actors. And I think there's a big difference, and I think that people like Tara Strong would really back me up on this, and I'm sure that Kevin Conroy would too, because these are people who are professionals. They do voices for a living. They don't just come in and lend their voice to a project. Now, I have not seen Justice League War. Mostly because I just don't want to, but that's an adaptation of the first arc of the New 52 Justice League comic, and that's why I don't want to see it. I just saw Flashpoint Paradox as a curiosity, but but after that, it was like, what, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. But with Son of Batman, I was hoping for something different, because this was based on kind of an eclectic mix of a lot of different types of story. A lot of it's kind of funny, it's kind of weird, it's very Grant Morrison. He wanted to bring kind of an element of fun back to Batman a little bit, and he did successfully for about 6 issues, which I think is the entire run of Batman and Son. And then all of a sudden, went to his crazy psychedelic, kind of, his comfort zone, and created, the super weird, the whole, all the Dr. Hurt shit and the Zur-En-Arrh and all that kind of crap. Anyway, so... But I was hoping, again, for something different. But, they have this same actor, Jason O'Mara, who voiced Batman in Justice League War, came over to this one. This one is also directed... Son of Batman was directed by Ethan Spalding, who's has no other real credits to his name, at least that I could find. And... the really weird thing about this is that the story was written by James Robinson, who most fans of comics love James Robinson because of his kind of reboot of Starman back in the early aughts or late 90s. I can't even remember, honestly, when that came out. Because it was a comic that I never followed, and I'm sure, shame on me, I'm sure, because I hear that it's really good. But he's also responsible for one of the greatest atrocities of cinema of all time, and I don't mean that lightly. I'm not just saying that because, oh, well, it's Alan Moore. No, it's really one of the 5 worst films I have ever seen in my entire life, and that is The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. That is an awful, awful film. It's a blight. It's anathema. It is, I can't think of more negative adjectives to heap on that film. It is really one of the worst pieces of shit I've ever seen in my life. So, with me, James Robinson does not have the best track record at all. But the screenplay for this adaptation was written by Joe R. Lansdale, who is mostly kind of a horror writer, and is someone that is very well respected in that community. But just a lot of kind of like fantasy horror fiction. He wrote the Jonah Hex short. And it's just, to me, this was like, it basically, at its best, Son of Batman was like, it was like a ripoff of like one of the lamest Bond films. At its worst, it was a horrifically violent and bloody and brutal affair. I'm like, wait, when the fuck did all this shit happen? Because, Anyway, I don't want to get into the film too much, but that's another thing that has been bothering me lately about the DC universe, or DC animated universe, is how incredibly violent it has become. I mean, it is, you know, I mean, you have, I mean, literally, I do not know how this film and the Flashpoint Paradox were not R rated. I mean, other than the fact that they're animated, but I mean, shit. I mean, there's stuff in there that outgrosses, like, you know, I mean, that is more violent than some of the, you know, films like Heavy Metal, which are, you know, that's like considered a hard R. I mean, admittedly, that, you know, has nudity and sex and stuff like that. But I mean, that has some of the most disturbing and, you know, bloody imagery that I've ever seen in an animated film. There's like that in Akira, um, and, you know, films like Perfect Blue and, you know, stuff like that. But anyway, that is clearly intended for adults, and this is kind of marketed towards, well, you know, your kid might be able to watch this. No, I would never show this to a child. Doesn't matter, it's a cartoon. I mean, like the opening sequence of Son of Batman is so horrifically bloody that you just become totally numb to it. It's like, I mean, there are, you know, swords and gunshots that are just blasting and ripping people apart. I mean, you know, just there's red all over the place. There is so much blood in the first like 7 minutes of this film, and it's insane. It's like, what the fuck is this? How is this? Who said that this was a good idea? Who thought that this was a good idea? So, I mean, it just became, and then, you know, it's like it cools off on the violence for a little while, and then all of a sudden, you know, in the final, and, you know, in the third act, it kicks it right back up. I mean, there's a moment where Deathstroke basically kind of crucifies Damian with a broken sword and a knife. And it's like, oh my god. And there's some really brutal sequences, of implied torture with Talia. So, I mean, it's like, wow. I mean, this is really getting bad, guys. I mean, first of all, I mean, again, it's the animation of the film is horrible. Thomas Gibson, who is an actor that I love, and I've loved since his independent film days in films like Sleep With Me and Love and Human Remains. And then, you know, he's been doing like Criminal Minds, and, you know, he did Dharma and Greg, and, you know, so I always liked him in those, but I didn't like the shows. So there's that. And, you know, Morena Baccarin, who is she is a veteran of the DCU voice cast, because, you know, they did a lot, you know, they kind of grabbed a lot of Whedon, a lot of the Whedon alum when they were doing Justice League Unlimited, you know, because Morena Baccarin was the voice of Black Canary. She also, and then, you know, like Amy Acker was the voice of the Huntress. Nathan Fillion was, at that time, he was still, you know, not a star. So he was voicing, you know, so he was voicing Vigilante in in Justice League Unlimited. But then, of course, he became a bigger star over time, and, you know, he started voicing Green Lantern in the animated films, not in the animated show, but in the animated films. And so, you know, and this Jason O'Mara guy, his voice is so boring. It was a huge fucking mess. And, you know, yes, it had the Ninja Man Bats for literally about 90 seconds. And that was like, huh? There's implied, like, it's implied for some reason that Batman was drugged when he slept with Talia in the night that eventually culminated in the creation of Damian. Now, I mean, of course, I know that Grant Morrison takes credit for that creation, but really the creation of that goes back to I want to say it was Mike Barr that did the Batman Son of the Demon comic, which was the moment that Son of Batman actually refers to when Batman and Talia slept together, and she had a child which she apparently lost, although we see it at the end of that being given away to a family, just like an orphan left at a doorstep. Anyway, but my point being is that it's gotten that the quality of DC Universe animated films has dropped very significantly. I mean, Batman: The Dark Knight Returns was, I mean, it was an idea that I thought honestly was impossible. They were not going to be able to properly do this, and they did it, and it was amazing. The first chapter wasn't perfect, but it was still really good. And the second chapter, once Joker comes on the scene, was, and Superman was just kind of brilliant and awesome, and I loved it. Even though I didn't think that Peter Weller was the greatest choice, he was a really good choice. Anyway, so I mean, it's like we went from way up here to like way down here, this kind of lowest common denominator, very much flash over substance, these kind of rapidly cranked out studio pieces, which is not to say that, I mean, DC wasn't doing that before in their animated films, but there at least was a measure of care. I mean, a great deal of care that was brought to these. I mean, I know that Year One was a big disappointment for a lot of people, myself included. But, what can you do? It's not everything's going to be good, But like, films like, Public Enemies and Under the Red Hood and Justice League Doom and the Dark Knight Returns series were just fantastic. And then some earlier films like, like Wonder Woman, very, very good. All-Star Superman was fantastic. I mean, and then all of a sudden to have 4 films in a row that are either, well, again, 3 films that I saw. I have not heard good things about Justice League War either, though. But 4 films, these 4 films that are very much subpar, and people have the same complaints about them as they have since Bruce Timm left. I think that really leaves us with only one answer, is that Bruce Timm must return. Because James Tucker, as important of a role as he's had in helping to shape the DC universe, the DC animated universe, I think it needs to be relegated back to like a co-creator or something like that. And also get Geoff Johns' fucking snout out of these movies. We need to, I know there's a brand new one that's going to be coming out, I think in the fall or in the winter or something like that, which is Batman Assault on Arkham, which honestly sounds to me like it's basically, I know it's got the Batman name and it's supposed to take place, what I understood, 2 years before the events of Batman Arkham Asylum, the video game. And it will show, it's the Suicide Squad. They're the real stars of this. But although Kevin Conroy is returning as the voice of Batman, It is also being directed by Jay Oliva, and written by Heath Corson, who also wrote Justice League War. So again, it's at least it's a new idea, and I just don't know how well that's going to do. I will probably end up seeing it eventually when it comes to Netflix, but for rent. But until then, forget it, because I'm really opting out of a lot of these newer DC animated films, when I used to be at a point where I was pre-ordering them before I even knew what they were, what exactly they were going to be about. I cared a lot about it, and now it's just gone from our fingertips. So please, DC, get it, get your shit turned around, because I'm sure that the business of this is probably it might even be doing better than it was prior to this, although I really doubt it. But something's got to give, and if it's not going to be you, then it's going to be the audience, because you've made too many serious mistakes lately. Canceling Young Justice, canceling Green Lantern, the animated series, in favor of Beware the Batman and the new Teen Titans cartoon, which pissed a lot of people off, and rightly so. And these movies are just awful. It's got to change. And the sad part is, it's the same people, for the most part, that are doing these films. They're writing them, they're directing them, but it's just not the same. So something is gone. The heart is gone. The emotion is gone. The drama is gone. And now all that's left is action, bloodletting, and really shitty animation. So get it right, people, because you're really, really close to losing me. So that's it. I know this is a lot longer than I planned on, so I do apologize for that. But if you're new here, please subscribe, thumb it up, thumb it down. Tell me what your thoughts are on this. I really want to hear what you think about this. And we'll see you next time. So I want to thank you again for tuning in and listening or watching. And we will talk next time. So until then, this is James Donnelly from the Shadow Gallery signing off, and reminding you, as always, to stay in the shadows.